Alright folks, how are we doing? It's Shabash, welcome back to the channel. Today we're continuing our beginner guide series on class progression, and we're going to do part 1 of the Mage class line. We'll take a deep dive into classes, their passive abilities and the skills you're going to learn, the specializations you're going to want to have, and of course the pets you'll want to pick up along the way as well. Going from tier 1 to tier 10 and even beyond. In part 2 we'll be covering itemization and gearing. We'll be checking out the best items at each tier, as well as some bargain basement alternatives. Remember, this series isn't a guide on how to play the game the most efficiently, how to get to tier 10 in 3 days. We all play the game at our own pace, and we all have differing levels of RNG. Please feel free to drop a comment below if you'd like to see anything specific that we can cover for you. Otherwise, grab your staffs, let's light a fire under this and get started. With a quick look at the Mage class tree overview, we can see from tier 1 to tier 10, it's quite set in stone, the pure Mage path. We've got a couple of options at tier 4 and tier 6. Otherwise, our choices are quite straightforward. I will drop a link in the description below to the Orna Legends website, where we'll put this as a written guide, and it will be giving you folk a nice quick reference to this overview. Otherwise, let's get started with the tier 1 Mage class, where we start the game at level 1 with the Vault spell, which is a really solid spell in the early game. It's elementalist damage, which means we can use this spell against any enemy. It will always do full damage and be unresisted. It's always a good idea to have at least one elementalist spell in your loadout throughout the entire game. And at level 3 we learn our first elemental skills. Once you've chosen your faction at level 10, and equip your relevant elemental faction skills. So if you choose Knights of Inferno, take Flame. If you take Frozen Guard, take Frost Out. Costs us only 5 mana, and this will be our go-to damaging skill. We get the 25% damage increase for doing elemental damage of our faction. Bear in mind, you'll come across mobs, even in tier 1, that are either resistant or immune to a certain elemental type of damage. For that reason, you always have Vault included, but also there are enemies that are weak to certain damage types. For example, snakes are weak to earthen damage, and we have 3 slots as a Mage class, I think. Yeah, 4 skill slots actually. So as long as you're equipping the skill of your faction and Vault as an elemental skill, you can equip other things depending on what mob types you can find. At level 25, so when we reach tier 2 we get slightly improved versions of these skills. They're not as mana efficient obviously. A lot of the time at early to mid game with the Mage class line, we are trying to be as mana efficient as possible. So you can see these skills cost 8 times the mana of the level 1 skills, sorry, the level 3 skills, but obviously don't do 8 times the damage. So you can equip your faction tier 2 skill just to give you that extra oomph if needed. But you know, at this stage of the game, once you find a fallen mage's staff, we're going to be doing plenty of damage with the lower skills anyway. So we don't have any passive abilities at tier 1, so let's move on to the Archmage, or the Witch, at tier 2, and you can see we've got a couple of mana recovery abilities as the Archmage. Neither of these are as good as small mana potions, by the way. And checking our skills, what do we learn as the Archmage? First one is the Magic Boost and Magic Shield. So Magic Boost is really nice. It gives us our single up magic stat, and we're not really going to replace that skill until tier 5, picking up the Dragoon class as a supplementary class where you learn Wyvern Speed. We also get the dex up with that skill. So Magic Boost is solid. Magic Shield, we can use it for dungeons later on if we need, but we're going to pick up Barrier 2 from the Adept class as well at some point, which gives us both defense and resistance up. Offensively, at level 40 we pick up Drain, which is the first of the Drain skills, and all the Drain skills do elementalist damage as well, which is nice. I would still try and keep Bolt as our elementalist skill because it only costs 5 mana, whereas Drain is 50 mana. It's still quite expensive at this point. And you can see the elemental skills we learn once reaching level 50. Yes, they do greater damage, but 75 mana. We can probably swap out for the level 25 skills that we learned as a Mage, but keep the level 3 skill. It's super mana efficient for 5 mana. So for example, if I was Earthen faction, I would keep Tremor 1 but swap out Tremor 2 for Quake, and the reason is Quake has higher damage penetration and does that much more damage. So if we're taking down some bosses at this tier, yeah, we want to be using these faction elemental skills that we learn as the Archmage. So moving on to tier 3 then, as the Sorcerer. And these first 2 skills we learn as the Sorcerer at level 50 are really solid for raiding. But yeah, essentially these skills age really well. You'll be using them throughout the majority of the game. Magic Shield 2 will be replaced by Golden Fortitude. Oh, my cat is on the phone. So we can talk about the Nightmare and Holy skills, which you learn at level 65. These can be quite useful depending on what kind of mobs you tend to be facing. For example, if you're playing regularly at nighttime, there's a lot of mobs which are weak to Holy damage. So definitely stick Holy on there. You'll probably one-shot everything at nighttime, skeletons, etc. We can always check Orna guide to find out which mobs are weak to certain elements. And finally, at level 75, we learn our first unstable magic skills for the 4 basic elements. You'll definitely want to equip the relevant spell to your faction. if you're in Storm Force or Frozen Guard, be prepared to lose some turns due to Paralyze and Freeze. So perhaps you want to use these skills as a guaranteed finisher in certain fights, in PvP for example, or against a boss. We will also inflict some self-damage from casting such powerful magic with these spells, but these will act like your hard-hitting nuke spell for the moment. Checking abilities finally, again we're looking at mana recovery, mana saver. It does continue the flavor of saving mana or reducing the mana cost, getting proficient at using spells, etc. in the mage class line. Small mana potion still number one though, always buy a few, always have loads in stock, and I think yeah, Sorcerer is solid. Let's move on to tier 4 where we're gonna have our first kind of decision to make, where we're going to either choose Spellsword or Mystic. I'm going to tell you why you want to be choosing Spellsword. They're both hybrid classes, okay? Spellsword is a hybrid of Mage and Warrior, whereas the Mystic is a hybrid of Thief and Mage. And that gives you a sense of where the differences lie in actually the base stats and abilities. We can see Spellsword has the Knight's Ward, so we start battles with Ward, which isn't huge, but it can be nice to take down bosses in the world, save us some health potions as well. Looking at the Mystic ability, apart from Experience Step, which is the same, we carry on the idea of saving mana, but 5% isn't a lot, let's be honest. We've got mana potions, and Apothecarist is... I quite like Apothecarist personally, especially when you're world farming. You get a little bit of extra juice, but you know, it's 25% mana potion. If you're healing out in the world outside of battle, you know, you're just auto healing everything up to full anyway, so not that much difference. Let's quickly look at the stats before looking at skills, because the skills are actually very similar. We can see the Mystic has 5 skill slots, Spellsword has 6, but one main reason I'd suggest taking Spellsword over Mystic is that Spellsword has increased health over the Mystic. It's not 7500. The stat differences here are way exaggerated because I'm level 250, but it is definitely noticeable going from Spellsword to Mystic that you will lose some health. So, you know, you have that extra buffer with the Knight's Ward, so we get Ward at the start of battle, a little bit of extra health. I like Spellsword for that reason, but you know, if you like Mystic, go for Mystic. They both lead to the same tier 5 class anyway. Let's check the spells then. And I guess thematically the Spellsword is more of your holy mage warrior type, and the Mystic is more of a dark mage because you learn the shadow magic compared to the Spellsword's Purify. So if you want to make your choice depending on holy or dark magic, please go for it. The rest of the skills are very, very similar. They both learn Bolt 3. So these magic sword, magic hammer skills, they actually do physical damage, remember? They're not elementalist damage. And the Mystic has thief-based versions. Let's have a look what they call, like magic arrow and magic dagger. So these skills are quite nice for 10 mana, pretty situational. Not going to be your hardest hitting skills, but it's okay. The main skill we're going to learn from both of these classes is actually magic strikes at level 100. This is our first multi-hit skill we're going to learn, and this is going to be a really efficient farming skill. It does physical damage, so always remember to pair it up with your elemental and elementalist skills. But yeah, at level 100 this is really nice. If you started raiding already, we can use magic strikes for our biggest DPS. And let's check, make sure Mystic. Yeah. So yeah, with Mystic we also learn magic strikes at level 100 as well. So there we go, that's tier 4 is your first choice to make in the mage line. It's up to you if you want to go thematically with the warrior over the thief hybrid, or if you picked up a really nice bit of warrior gear or thief gear you can use. Your mage career in Orna is not dictated by which class you choose at tier 4. So go with what you want, they're both fine. I preferred Spellsword personally for that extra bit of tankiness. And let's move on to the tier 5 Druid, which is a solid class. Druid is a really cool thematic class as part of the mage line. It's probably the best because we don't need to come back and get this class as if we were going down the warrior or thief progression. A lot of the best skills in the game we learn as druids. So let's quickly go over these buff skills which every other class type will come back and get, and that's Mimic's Mischief here, Golem's Fortitude, and then for the mage class obviously Jin's Talent is what we're looking at as well. So Mimic's Mischief gives the double up for both attack and magic, and it has the chance to give you some downs as well for resistance, defense, and also has the chance to make you cursed. So it might not be the best option for us, but if you like gambling, Mimic's Mischief is good for the double up. Otherwise, Jin's Talent gives you the double up magic, but also gives you double down defense and resistance. So if you don't have a way to counteract the defense or resistance downs by a Ring of Day or an Arch Gadget, you might want to play your luck with Mimic's Mischief. By the way, Rings of Day and the Arch Gadget, those accessories are generally accessible every couple of months depending on what event raids are going on, so keep your eye out for them. Golem's Fortitude is really good for us because it only gives you the attack down, doesn't affect magic in any way, gives you the double defense, double resistance up. I would say a lot of the mage classes in Orna, especially in the later tiers, acts more like a tanky mage class rather than your glass cannon, really hard hitting mage, which could be quite typical in other kind of fantasy games. So Golem's Fortitude really fits our style well as a mage class in Orna. Yeah, you're going to want to take Golem's Fortitude, will fit into all our skill loadouts basically from here on in. The next important skills we'll talk about are Sorrow and Sorrow 2, which we learn. at level 125. These are charge type skills that get charged up depending on the amount of beasts that you've slain in the previous 36 hours to this point. So you can check on Orna Guide exactly what type of mobs count towards charging up your Sorrow, and obviously your passive ability as well, which is the Beast Mode. These are separate abilities, by the way. Beast Mode and Sorrow are different things, bear that in mind. You'll see on your character buff bar there's two different charge ups for Sorrow and Beast Mode. If you're playing the game regularly at all at this point, Sorrow is going to be your new favorite spell. At this point it hits super hard against a lot of mobs. So yeah, if you're playing regularly at this point enough to keep the Sorrow charges fully buffed, then Sorrow and especially Sorrow 2 are going to be super fun for you. They're going to be doing a hell of a lot of damage, especially when paired up with the double ups from Jin's Talent or Mimic's Mischief, and of course the single magic up, which by the way increase the amount of beasts you need to do full maximum damage with these skills. So even if on your character buff bar the skull is saying 100% charged, that might only be fully charged for if you don't have any battle buffs up like Jin's Talent, etc., double ups, single ups. The only way to be 100% sure that you've got maximum damage output is if Sorrow 2, for example, is doing the same amount of damage every turn. If you're in raids, that will go down by like 1 or 2%, not even that much per turn, because of the way that raid bosses increase their stats over time the more damage you do in a run, but you know it'll be really close. So the basics of it is if you're killing loads of beasts, Sorrow 2 is going to be an absolute animal to deal with. Sorrow 1 as well, they do elementalist damage, really good for PvP as well in wars and stuff. One thing a few people do who are playing alts and things is they pick up Druid as a class, but actually they go back to Spellsword because it has more health and it's a bit more tankier. You know, it's up to you. I had lots of fun playing Druid in my first playthrough. Really solid class. You learn some of the best skills in the game. The Sorrow skills are super fun as well. So for your skill loadouts, you're looking at an elementalist skill, your main element skill as well, maybe Sorrow or Sorrow 2 for a really hard hitting elementalist skill, and then you want Golden Fortitude and one of your main buffs as well. At tier 6 we have our second and final choice to make with regards to which class we want to choose to continue down the mage path. But for the vast majority of players, I'm going to recommend you take the Battlemage. Especially for PvE content, the Battlemage is superior to the Grand Mystic, which is more focused towards PvP with regards to its abilities, where we have Mystic Feather, which is probably a better passive compared to the Battlemage's Mana Siphon. The charge passive all give you the same stat increase. Yeah, Mystic Feather, as you get below 50% health, you do gain an extra dodge chance, but the thing is that can be countered with a Stun Dart or a Sleep Dart, for example. So yes, it's slightly better for PvP, but it can be countered, and stat-wise, there's nothing much between the two different classes. Battlemage, you have extra magic compared to Grand Mystic, you have extra dexterity and more mana. But the real reason we want to take Battlemage is due to the skills we learn. We learn these multi-elemental skills, and using the one relevant to your faction, these are so efficient, they're so good for damage, both in the world, in raids. You can pair it up with magic strikes and one other elemental skill, and you're good. Like pair it up with Sorrow, for example, if you're playing regularly to kill beasts. You even learn Sorrow 3, which is like your first really big hit spell, which takes 3 turns. Takes a lot of beasts to charge up though. The skills in general are just super nice. Yeah, these multi-elemental skills. You get the 25% extra faction damage bonus. With Grand Mystic, you don't learn any of these elemental skills. These kind of physical magic dagger skills, you know, same idea as before. Maybe have one in your loadout if you want. You know, the arcane skills are never going to deal as much damage as your faction elemental skills, which are like, you have the equivalent versions of them, but you don't have that 25% faction damage bonus. So realistically, these aren't really replacing any skills that we already have available to us. And yes, we need to talk about Anduin Fury, which is a ridiculous outlier. For the longest time, it was the hardest hitting spell in the game, which was really random. Well, for sure against high resistance enemies anyway. So for late game, you could use it. But now with tier 10, there's a lot of classes which are either immune to arcane damage like Gilgamesh, or you've got heretics and deities which are going to be immune to arcane, you know, 1 times out of 2 or whatever. So yeah, Anduin Fury is a really cool spell, but it has a very specific use case. It takes 3 turns in battle, so you're not going to be running around killing frost trolls with this thing. And so unless you kind of know what you're doing and you want to specifically concentrate on PvP at this tier for some reason, you might take Grand Mystic. For the vast majority of players, go with Battlemage. The multi-elemental skills are really mana efficient and you'll be using them for a long time. Feel free to drop a comment below if you've got anything to say on this decision. Maybe you found some nice ornate thief gear from Titan and you want to wear it on Grand Mystic, but I'll definitely stand by recommending Battlemage to 80-90% of the players out there. You'll definitely enjoy it, especially the multi-element skills, and yeah, Sorrow 3 can be good for raiding as well if you like to kill beasts and charge that mother up. Let's move on to tier 7 where we don't have any option, and that is the Archdruid. At tier 7 there are 2 classes which can wield mage gear, but for the mage line to continue we can only really take Archdruid because the tier 8 Necromancer has Archdruid as a prerequisite, and although Dragon Knight can wear mage gear, we can't continue on to Necromancer as Dragon Knight. So we're only going to talk about Archdruid, and the one thing you might find out when you're coming from Battlemage is that you're going to lose some base magic. I don't know why. Archdruid is more of a natural progressor from Grand Mystic because it has that rogue and mage hybrid. It's got an awesome sprite though, a few extra skill slots. We still have the beast mode passive to increase our stat. We also get the life siphon passive for the first time in the game, which is really nice for raiding. You're going to love that at tier 7 and tier 8 with Necromancer. Apothecarist is okay, I quite like it personally, and yeah, Mana Saver. Still nothing really beats out of my small mana potions in the game. So if you did go Grand Mystic, you will pick Sorrow 3 up here at level 155. That'll probably become your number 1 raiding skill from this point forward, but it does mean you need to keep it charged with killing those beasts. Other skills we learn is Drain 2 as a nice elementalist healing ability, and that does stack with our life siphon passive, so that's super nice again for raiding. Now thematically you learn some really nice skills down here like Wyvern's Wrath, Cock Breath, Tiamat's Breath. They're really cool thematically, but unfortunately they're really not as powerful as they look. They've got really low resistance penetration. They need a buff really. And I mean really low penetration. Like you can try use Wyvern's Wrath and you might be doing 0 like. And Cock Breath, Tiamat's Breath, they cost 200 mana, really expensive. I hope in the future Odie comes back and revisits these spells because they're really cool, but to all extents and purposes you're not going to be using any of these unfortunately. Wisp's Heal 2 can be a nice pickup for certain situations. Otherwise, apart from the sprite, there's not really much else to say. I mean, I love this sprite. It's so cool. Thematically, one of my favorite classes in the game. Objectively, we want to kind of get through here as fast as possible, move on to Nekromancer, which is a much better class. So at tier 8, we're going to learn the powers of the Fallen with the Nekromancer class. You can see you do need Archdruid to get here. We pick up some nice skill slots and some extra base magic. Looking at our abilities here as well, we now move away from killing beasts and we can now kill everything to charge up our stats and to charge up our summon dead skills, which work just like Sorrow. Mana Rush will save you on numerous occasions, especially in PvP. Remember at tier 6 going up against all those blade masters that just won't die, now you get to feel the same way. We also carry on the life siphon, which is super nice for raiding. And Mana Siphon is a nice little bonus, but nothing we can build around really. Skill wise, obviously the Nekromancer is based around dark magic thematically, but realistically we're still going to be using our elemental skills we learned from Battlemage, or elemental skills like Summon Dead and Sorrow, because unfortunately there's no holy or dark factions in the game, so you don't get that 25% bonus damage from using the skills, and those skills don't have any increased damage effects to compensate for that. So again, unless you're going up against a specific enemy which is weak to dark magic, check on the Orna guide. The most important skills we learn with Nekromancer is the Drain 3, our most powerful direct healing ability we learn as a mage. You're going to be using this to the end of the game. And of course Summon Dead is going to be a great pickup. We now don't need to only kill beasts to charge up this spell. All the mob kills, they all count towards Summon Dead. No discrimination between monster types, that's what we like here. Forbid is quite thematically nice as well. Double down, giving your opponent temporary double down. Honestly, I recommend you never use it because you know as well as I do that Sod's Law dictates these temporary debuffs are only going to last 1 turn max on your opponents, especially in war, especially in PvP. Forbidden Art is a nice spell thematically again, but it's probably not going to outdamage a 2-turn Summon Dead 2. And then you have these Fey Elemental 3 skills, which again are a little bit underpowered in my opinion. Necromancer doesn't get any bonus critical damage, and these aren't going to outdamage your multi-elemental skills, but the magic penetration isn't even that good either, especially compared to the unstable magic you learned at tier 3. But you know, feel free to try them out, see if you like the extra critical damage. The next big skill really is Summon Dead 2, you learn at level 200. That'll be nice going into tier 9. Gives you a good solid hit, fully charged, elementalist damage. Overall, the Necromancer gives you nice base stats and really nice abilities. That's what makes it such a good class. And moving on to tier 9, we of course have the Omnimancer, the unorthodox Mage of Avalon. Omnimancer really starts to define the idea of the tanky mage at the end game of Orna. You get stacks of base HP and mana, allowing you to really pump up your ward as well at this point, especially once you get some poly gear. You have that Omnimancy passive ability that will make you immune to random elements, which can be so clutch in PvP. And by the way, what isn't mentioned here at all is that you have innate resistance to both holy and dark damage as well, and that's separate to the Omnimancy passive, which we'll have a look at now actually. So School of Avalon, it's your typical charge up your base stats passive ability, which is so prevalent during the mid game in Orna. But then we have some really solid defensive passives here. Omnimancy, which I've just mentioned, will give you random immunity to any element, amazing in PvP. If you're fighting against Omnimancers, remember to use elementless spells or physical damage attacks. We also have Mana Rush again from Necromancer, and we get Steadfast for the first time I think in the mage line as well, which is really nice. It's one of those really nice passes which you don't know what you're missing until you actually have it, and then you switch to a class which doesn't have it. So checking out the skills, we learn the third tier of those physical spells like Magic Sword, Magic Hammer. I guess with these types of spells you probably want to have at least one of them in your PvP loadout. Magic Sword has a chance to lower your opponent's resistance, which is fairly nice. And then we start learning these Omnimancy skills, the Frostfire, Heat Lightning, etc. So these are really interesting skills, these Omnimancy skills. You always want to pair up the skill which has your faction element with the other elements. So for example, if you're in the Earthen Legion, you'll be using either Iced Earth, Quake Storm, or Scorched Earth, because you do get the 25% faction bonus damage. All of these Omnimancer spells have really high magic penetration as well, so these are great for going up against high resistance enemies, maybe higher tier players in PvP for example. These are really good for doing boss dungeons, going up against the fallen gods. Just overall really interesting, really powerful skills. Learn the best situation to use them for you. Arcanist 2 has a place as a kind of nuking spell, but it's not going to be as good as your fully charged Summon Dead 2 for example. Magic Dagger is probably my favorite out of those magic weapon skills, because it can proc a bleed on those very rare occasions, and proccing a dot on your enemy which has last chance or mana rush might be enough to take them down immediately. Otherwise, we learn the second tier of our multi-element spells that we learned from Battlemage. Probably find that when you're world farming, the first level of these multi-elemental skills is enough and is more mana efficient to keep you going, but it's always nice to have the option for these, and you can use these in raiding for example if you're not charging up Summon Dead. We also learn Magic Strikes 3 going into tier 10, but it won't do the same turn damage as with the multi-elemental skills. Again, looking at these phase skills, Omnimancer doesn't get any bonus damage for critical strikes, and all of these phase skills have a set critical strike chance. You can't increase or decrease it. I think honestly with all the phase skills, they're not going to be consistent enough with the criticals that will make you want to use them as a first choice option, as opposed to like Summon Dead giving you guaranteed elementless hit. And you've got the Omnimancer spells, which even the first level of Omnimancer spells, these first ones you learn at level 200, their magic penetration is super high in comparison to the phase skills. And then 5 levels later you learn the second tier of Omnimancer spells, which are just more powerful versions of the same thing. Yeah, you might even want to be trying these out in raids. So that's the Omnimancer, really nice tanky mage. And finally at tier 10 we can unlock the hardest hitting class in the game, the Exiled Warlock, the Heretic class. We now have a critical strike damage multiplier of 2.5 rather than 2. So those phase spells might turn useful. We are locked into pure mage equipment. For base stats, we continue the theme of Omnimancer. We have a shitload of mana, and I mean a shitload of mana, more health. We can really rack up some nice ward on this class. You also have a lot of base dexterity for some reason. You will miss a lot of attacks against heretics for some reason. More skill slots than you can shake a stick at. Let's have a look at our battle passive, Iconoclast. From 50% mana down to 0, our stats get buffed in a linear fashion to a maximum of 2. I'll talk more about that and the issues that Heretic has with mana at the end once we've gone over the skills and stuff. But yeah, we definitely need to talk about Heretic and mana. Omnimancer 2, we can now get random immunity to any element in the game. That includes Dragon, Dark and Holy. Mana Rush again, giving you that last chance, really nice for PvP. We get Life Siphon back, really nice for raiding. And then we have the Heretic passive ability, which makes our skills cost 25% less mana, which also ties into the Heretic mana debate. Let's just go over the skills quickly. We get the 4th version of the Magic Sword, Magic Weapon type skills. I think we've touched on them enough. The same theory applies to them. Maybe take one in your PvP loadout. Now we can start thinking about using phase skills. But to be honest, in my experience of speaking to fresh tier 10 mages, they're not using the phase skills at all really. They're using the multi-elemental skills, which are more mana efficient, they do more damage, they give you more consistent damage. And we learn the 3rd level of the multi-elemental skills at 230. They cost a shit ton of mana, but you're a heretic, you will generally have a shit ton of mana to use. In fact, you will have a shit ton of mana. These multi-elemental skills are going to be really nice for raiding, especially if you're a Mage. Specialization. Mage also reduces the mana cost of spells. In fact, if I remember correctly, when tier 10 classes were first released, the Heretic passive ability paired with the Mage's passive made spells cost 0 mana. So like, so yeah, that was patched pretty fast. And then once you reach level 240, which you can do, believe me, patience is key, you will learn one of the most savage skills in the game, the Fey Unstable Magic, Fey Inferno, Fey Glacier, Fey Fulmination, and the big one, Fey Cataclysm. And yes, I know Ultima and Ultima 2 exists with the deity, but when I'm talking specifically against raiding the Morrigan, Morrigan has resistance to the Ultima skills, but does not have resistance to these Fey skills. So if you want to see 7-figure damage numbers against the Morrigan, you'll be using the Fey Unstable Magic skill of your relevant faction. Let me know in the comments if you want to see a video dedicated in the setup to doing one of these massive big hits. I'm talking 2, 3, 4, 5 million damage in one hit against the Morrigan. So Heretic is definitely an amazing class. It's tanky, it has a lot of base ward, it means you can start raiding against the Morrigan pretty easily as soon as you reach tier 10. You have the random elemental immunity, you have stacks of magic, and the only real drawback is the issue between Heretic and mana itself. And I guess this issue is exaggerated at the start of tier 10 when you don't have a lot of items which reduce your base mana. It's also exaggerated if you use the Mage class, and the issue I'm talking about, remember, is the battle passive Iconoclast only starting to kick in once you reach 50% mana. And you know, as a Heretic, you're starting with over 3000 mana in most situations. You need to use a lot of skills to even get down to half mana, where Iconoclast is only giving you 1, 2, 3% increase in stats, never mind getting that boost fully charged. It takes so many turns to get it up to speed and get it feeling really nice. There's been lots of discussion about having like a mana bomb skill, which would cost something like 1000 mana. Use that a couple of times and then you can actually get down into Iconoclast range. So it is something to be aware of. By no means should that mean that you don't pick up Heretic at all and you switch to Warrior or Thief or whatever. I love Heretic as a tier 10 class, especially thematically. Those critical strike damage is super nice. It's a fantastic first tier 10 class and it scales really well into the depths of the late game. So that concludes the pure mage class pathline. Let's also quickly mention some skills we want to pick up from the Arcanists in the wild. You will of course want to pick up Ward of Mithril and then Ward of Ortonite once you reach to tier 10. Those are super important ward skills. And then the other important spells we're going to pick up are the transference spells, which deal non-elemental magic damage and also recover ward. So the first one you get at tier 6 isn't that strong, but once you get to tier 8 with transference 2 and then finally at tier 10 with transference 3, these actually have really high magic penetration against resistance and they do non-elemental magic damage. So these are really strong in PvP, especially against other heretics and deities, and you'll be pleasantly surprised with the power output of these spells. So keep an eye out for them at Arcanist shops as soon as you reach the relevant tiers. And now let's talk about the supplementary classes, which we'll be going back to pick up at certain points in the game for their skills. The first one is the tier 4 Adept class, the Warrior class, or the Melee class I should say, and the skill we want from Adept is Barrier 2. This gives us single up for defense and resistance in one single turn. Very efficient and it never fails. You'll pair this up with Golem's Fortitude and your defensive buffs are good to go. And next we have the tier 5 Dragoon class. This is more of a quality of life improvement with the Wyvern Speed spell, which has the potential to give you both dexterity and magic single up in one turn. It can occasionally fail, which is annoying, but you have the 60 mana and the dexterity is a nice addition. We're mainly using it for the single magic up, which would replace your magic boost spell. Our next supplementary class is going to be Atlas Vanguard at tier 8, and the skill we mainly want from here is Divine Bastion, which gives us 100% ward increase. This is not so important once you have Ward of Mithril and Ward of Ortonite at tier 10, but this can be great for raiding, PvP, and doing long dungeons. Just gives you that extra buffer. And the elemental ward skills are actually pretty nice as well. You'll generally have a lot of skill slots to fit these in individually. Even better if you can already cover some elemental resistances from your gear. Not as important if you've got the tier 9 Cataphract spec when you have Prison Wall, but these are really useful later on. So the next class we are going to talk about is the God classes. Again, for the Deific Channel is the main one at tier 9. We pick up Deific Channel on your tier 9 God class once you reach level 225 going into tier 10s. It's really nice for raiding, especially if you're not Magi spec and you don't have the Greater Meditation. And for example, you might actually want the Cataphract spec if you're going against Morrigan for the first time. So eventually you'll definitely want to get your faction God class anyway. We can quickly mention the Seal 2 spells. So for example, Terra Seal 2. They're actually pretty nice spells. You've got good magic penetration. They give you ward and you get a small amount of health regen. They're solid spells, honestly. I like the fact it gives you ward turns. Try it out, see if you like it. And finally, after you reach tier 10, you want to make a beeline for the Beowulf class, and that is for the Gates. Again, Gate of Snotra is the one we want. At level 230, this will give you the equivalent to a 50% increase in magic during battle. So now I think we can talk about specializations. As we know, our first specialization choice in the game of Orna is free, so we're not going to spend it on a tier 3 useless apprentice. The only things you get are an extra skill slot, 5% mana, and 2% increased magic on your base magic, which must be so low I doubt you'll even get +2 to magic. You don't get any skills or abilities, and honestly even the Trickster spec would be more useful. So we're going to ignore our tier 3 spec and go straight into tier 5. And again, I'm going to recommend you take the Berserker spec for the insane power boost that you get from the Berserk 1 spell. So at level 100 immediately on reaching tier 5, this Berserk 1 spell will make your life so much better. It gives you a 50% damage boost to both attack and magic, and you only get a 5% dot, which you'll be able to counter with the Drain spell from Druid at this point. For a long time in the game, Berserk only affected attack damage, but it now definitely affects both attack and magic damage, so we pick this up. This gives us by far the largest damage increase, largest power increase at this point in the game. You can also check out Berserk 2, which will increase all of your stats by 25%, gives you the single up, but the dot is significantly more than Berserk 1. So really we only need the Berserk 1 spell here. We're not bothered about the lack of HP, we're going to be killing things so fast, and I'm going to explain why you don't want to take the real magic based specializations like Scholar and Stargazer. You get 5% increase to your base magic stat here. Is that anywhere near 50% of your total magic stat? I don't think so, and the skills just never come into it. They're not going to be better than your elemental skills of your faction, twinned up with the Berserk buff, and you don't get any abilities. Looking at the Scholar spec, you learn some elemental spells, and these imbue element skills don't concern magic damage users because they only affect your weapon. So I highly recommend you take the Berserker spec. I mean, Berserker is so strong we might not even switch out from it until tier 9. Let's look at our tier 7 spec option, which was the go-to for a lot of magic users, and that is the Magus spec. You get a small 5% increase to your base magic, and you learn the Great Meditation skill. The skill skill trade-off between Berserker and Magus is going to be your deciding factor, I think. Great Meditation takes 3 turns in battle, but it does give you triple magic up, which effectively doubles your magic stat, but it's a temporary buff, remember that. It could last only 1 turn, whereas the Berserk 1 spell gives you a 50% increase to magic, and it lasts for the entire battle. I don't think you have to be great at maths to realize which spec is going to give you a better overall value. With regards to boosting your magic for the span of a fight, we get the Magus ability, which makes your spells cost 25% less mana. I guess that can make you more efficient with world farming, but for raiding and probably dungeons as well, honestly Berserker is probably better. If you don't like the idea of having the Berserker subclass, then you go with Magus. It's absolutely fine. I just think Berserker is still better at this point. Let's talk about a tier 9 spec where we have a lot of options here actually. Our first spec to consider is the Cataphract, which is obviously a very defensively focused spec, and that pairs quite well with the tanky mage classes of Omnimancer and Heretic. Now obviously Cataphracts will benefit more if you have pieces of ward gear, for example from Poly, so this might be a good consideration for you in the later parts of tier 9 and going into tier 10 because it gives you that Prism Wall spell, so you can use that turn 1 against the Morrigan and you're protected against all of her elemental skills, getting that 50% resistance. It's definitely more of a survivability spec. You get a 12% increase to health, which is a lot. It will increase your base ward, so it's very viable if you want better survivability, maybe for doing boss dungeons and for raiding against the Morrigan, for example. The next option we have is the Magi, which is definitely more offensively focused. We can see we get a 10% bonus to our base magic, which at tier 9 and 10 is not bad. Skill wise, you have Great Meditation and Great Meditation 2. The difference with Great Meditation 2 is it has the opportunity to potentially lower your opponent's resistance. It can actually do resistance double down as well. Again, it requires 3 turns in battle, but it will give you the triple magic up. And then checking the interesting abilities, we have the Magi, making your spells cost 50% less mana. And if you remember our chat with the Heretic mana issue, if you're Heretic Magi, you're going to have over 3000 mana at the start of fights, and then your spells are going to be costing like 75% less mana. So it's going to take you a long time to get into Iconoclast and depletion range. You can see the depletion acts like a mini Iconoclast. Once your mana reaches below 50%, it starts charging up, and it charges up linearly up to 25%. So the closer you get to 0 mana, you will do up to 25% increased damage with spells. So Magi is definitely your purest specialization for mages. It's absolutely a good option. I then want to talk about the Raider spec, speaking of damage, and obviously we don't get any decent stats from the Raider, but we get the Berserk 3 spell. This gives you double up to all your stats, but the damage over time on you is very significant. Why am I recommending this? It's only really used for doing massive hits in raids. You pair this with like your Fey Cataclysm, Fey Fulmination, and you have the Berserk one from your Chimera pet. You've got a lot of damage multipliers. So if you like to see big numbers in raid, feel free to try out Raider. I wouldn't say it's a priority at all for general gameplay, but it's something you might want to try now and then. Finally, let's talk about the Sequencer. This is a newly added dual wielding mage spec, and at the time of filming this video, it's about to get buffed for sure within the next few days, I think. So we can ignore weapon swap. I don't think it's very useful for mages, and the stats aren't amazing. You get extra dexterity, you also get a couple of extra skill slots, but the reason you take Sequencer is for the passive ability. There's currently a 12.5% chance for spells to be double cast. That includes critical strikes, and your multi-skills will hit twice, so you'll see 6 damage numbers come up. I think after dual wielding gets buffed, the Sequencer is going to be really viable for fast and hard-hitting mages in a similar style to the Swashbuckler for melee. As long as you've got 2 decent staves, then you currently get an overall 20% increase to your magic stat, which isn't said here, but I've worked it out in the game. It acts like a flat 1.2 multiplier to your magic stat. Currently, dual wielding takes 45% of your weapon's value. That's definitely going up according to the dev. So I think we're really going to be able to see some really high magic numbers with the Sequencer and Heretic. Let's wait and see. And just overall, it's really cool thematically. Dual wielding stays. Awesome. And moving on to pets that we're going to recommend for the mage class line. The first one we're going to pick up is the Wisp pet at tier 4. This is a really popular pet, and for good reason. You're going to love the 300 HP heal that it gives you. That will go really nicely once we get the Berserker spec to counteract the dot, and the Wisp's heal spell also cures common status ailments like freeze, burn, paralysis, etc. This is just a really solid early game pickup for your pet, and that's going to last us into tier 7 until we pick up its big bro or big sister, the Twilight Wisp. You get increased healing, you still have the status ailment healing as well. You'll notice it does a little bit of extra damage. It's really nice. Just to explain my thought process with the pet and the class tree overview in the background, the top line of pets are going to be your main pet, which you can use in all general situations, and then on the bottom line you've got some specific pets which you can pick up now and then, but definitely concentrate on the top line first. And the next pet we'll pick up after Twilight Wisp is going to be the Pale Dragon. Because it's so rare, we might not pick this up until late tier 8 or even into tier 9, and that's okay because it goes really well with that tanky mage idea. You have the Miracle spell, which gives you like a temporary barrier too, and the Miracle spell also gives you a small heal. The other main spell here is this spell, which cures every status ailment in the game except bleed bleeding and toxic, I think. So it's much more potent than the Wisp's heal 2. You'll probably have to build multiple bestiaries at this point to find one of these bad boys. And then at tier 10, of course, we're going to pick up Chimera for the Berserk spell. Going to be fantastic for raiding, gives you that 50% damage increase. The Heretic has the Life Siphon passive ability, so that counters the dot effect from Berserk really nicely. You'll probably use Chimera for dungeons as well. Power through. The damage boost it gives you is just so much better than any other option at tier 10, unfortunately. The next bet we'll mention is the Banshee at tier 5. This is specifically only for raiding because of the Whale spell. It has a chance to drop your opponent's resistance to double down, which will obviously really increase your damage. In some fights you'll get this after a few turns, but in other fights it might take you 50 or 100 turns to get the debuff down on your opponent. So obviously feel free to try it. It probably won't give you as consistent damage as the Berserker spec and just the Wisp's heal pet, to be honest, just to have that extra healing on you. But Banshee was very popular before the Berserk spell affected magic damage. That was changed during summer of 2020. So now the Berserk spell affects both attack and magic damage. I also recommend you pick up a Greater Yokai at some point during the game. Very strong for PvP, especially strong against thief classes. I definitely recommending having one in your keep at all times to be used in warfights as needed. And then at tier 9 there's a couple of dragon options which will supplement our damage. Rather than having the Pale Dragon or a Twilight Wisp, which is more of a healing pet, you can see Weaver spells all do magic damage as opposed to the Nidhogg pet, which is more attack based, as well as having a couple of hybrid spells. Feel free to pick up these two dragons if you want to increase your damage output. My first playthrough is Omnimancer at tier 9. I had the Griever pet for a lot of it. They definitely get outclassed by Chimera at tier 10. Alright, that's it folks. That concludes part 1 of our in-depth Mage class progression guide in Orna. We've covered all the classes from tier 1 to tier 10, all the pure Mage spells, abilities, etc. that you want to be using. We've recommended you the best specs and pets to use alongside your pure Mage class progression. We went super in depth. I didn't think it would take this long. I think there's so many spells to talk about for mages. I think I'll make a really fast summary video as well. Be sure to check out part 2 when it drops. We'll be taking you through the best itemization options for mages. If you found something useful in this video or I helped you in any way, feel free to bash the like button, subscribe for more Orna content. I'm Shabash. Thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next one. Ciao.